Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Garage Biljon and to my rather sad looking flood damaged 968 Cabrio. In the previous episode, we took out the alternator from this car because it was no longer functioning, and we also discovered a bad wiring harness that goes between the starter and the alternator. And I said I'll order a new one, which is also the reason the work on this guy got a little bit delayed. But as I said in the last episode on this guy, I have a whole bunch of parts that have arrived, and all of the stuff that you see on this bench has to go into or on the engine in the 968. So let's get the car up into the air, and then I'll take you through all the parts that I've got here on the bench, and we will work out a plan to get them all installed in the car. All right, she's back up in the air, so let me take you through all the things we have on the bench and that I'll need to give this car a major service. This is not complete, there are still more things I can do, but this is a good first stab. So I'll start in the back. This is a new air filter. I've got 4 new spark plugs and I've got an oil filter. Then over here, this is a balance shaft seal and a camshaft seal. And then this bag is a almost invisible little plastic ring thin sheet, like millimeter thick. I don't know what it's for, but I'll figure it out. Over here, I've got a new key for the 968 because the one I've got with it's quite sad. And then we have 3 tools that I ordered special. This is a flywheel lock that goes in the space where the starter goes. This is a spanner that we use to do the adjustments and the tightening of the rollers. And this is also a spanner that we use on the rollers. Over here, I've got 3 liters worth of gearbox oil. This is Porsche branded, so it's pretty expensive, but you know it's got the exact right additives for the car, and other brands tend to not always be 100% correct. Then I have 7 liters worth of engine oil. This is 0W40. This is a fairly low mileage engine, so I'm 100% sure that this will be okay. And then I have a radiator flush. I just want to make sure that there's no junk in the radiator, and I've got engine flush for the oil system. This is something I do on every new car that I buy. Next to this, I have a new water pump. This is prudent to change when you're going to change the timing belts because you've got everything open and they tend to go as soon as you've done the new timing belt. This is the way Porsche advises it. That's the way I'm going to be doing it. Right here is a new gasket that goes with that water pump. And then over here, we have all the new rollers that we need. I think 1 or multiple of these are squeaking on the car, so that's why I ordered them all. I just want to make sure all of them are fresh. Right next to that, we have a new timing belt, and I have a new balance shaft belt, and I also have a new multi-rib belt. And then the last thing is the wiring harness, the one that was bad in the car. So there's a lot of things here that has to go into the car, and I have to figure out the best sequence of doing the work. So I think what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to tackle the alternator job first. So I'm going to put in this harness and I'm going to put in this alternator. I am not going to use this belt yet. I'm going to use the old one that's on the car because I don't want to change it yet. By doing this, hopefully I have fixed my charging problem. And if I fixed my charging problem, that means I will be able to run this engine up to temperature, which is what I need to do. Because if I want to change the oil, I need to have an engine that has warm oil in it. And I also want to do the flush, which means I need to run this engine for a couple of minutes to 2.5 hours. The same goes for the radiator. If I want to do a proper cleaning of that radiator, I need to get that to be warm. So I need the engine to be at operating temperature for most of the other work. So I think by starting here, I have the best fighting chance to get that done. And obviously once I've done the flush, then I can take apart the front covers and I can take off the belts, but I can also then change the water pump. I think the last thing I'll be doing is the oil service with the gearbox and the engine and the spark plug. So that stuff will be last. But the seals, the rollers, the belts, the water pump, that all happens after I've done the harness and the alternator and I've done the flush. So what we're going to be doing now is I want to clean the area where the alternator goes, because obviously this part was not cleaned when we were doing the power washing outside. And you can see there's a lot of dirt and gunk still hiding below here, which I want to just have it nicely cleaned up. Once that is done, I'm going to trace this wiring harness to see how it runs through the engine and disconnect it from the main harness. I don't know where that is, so we'll find that together. And once that's all done, we can start putting in the new stuff. So let's start cleaning this junk off. All right, so I think I'm quite happy with this result. You can see the frame rail back there is nice and clean. The strut tower has been cleaned as well, and everything down here on the frame rail has also been cleaned, together with the springs and all the things that were on the throttle body. That's all nice and clean. The intake pipe is clean-ish. I still need to go through this a couple of more times, but most importantly, this bracket where the alternator hangs on is clean as well. So if you wonder what I use to clean engines with, it's not a secret. I discovered this stuff about 10 years ago, and it's phenomenal at cleaning engines. So I recommend this to all my friends. If you want to clean your engine, this stuff, Autoglym Engine and Machine Cleaner, absolute miracle cleaning solution. And for the rest, I just use a whole bunch of cheap brushes that I buy from the hardware store. But that means we are now ready to go pull out that wiring harness. All right, so this is the new harness that we're going to be putting into the car. As you can see, it's got a little white connector that goes into the main loom. And this is the side that goes onto the alternator. And this one is the side that goes onto the starter motor. So what I'm looking for is this plug. So let's jump underneath the car and see if we can find where it's plugging in. All right, so now that we're underneath the car, this is the harness that goes onto the alternator. And as I'm touching it, it's actually crumbling in my hands. This runs underneath the intake manifold, and I'll take you to the other side. And if I pull on it, you can see this guy's moving. So we know which one it is up there in the engine. And it actually splits into two pieces. You can see there's a, let me see if I can get you there. There's a part that goes up towards the brake booster, and there's this part coming from the alternator, and it flows down onto the starter down here. So this bottom one is the one we are going to replace. The top one is a cable coming directly from the battery. I don't think we have to replace this one. It looks like it's in good nick, but I can order this up as well if I see that it's not great. But what I'm learning is that the plug for the wiring harness is definitely not underneath the engine. It must be somewhere on the top, and I think the best spot to look for it is right there on top of the brake booster. This is the brake booster from the top, so I am not seeing the plug anywhere, but I have a strong suspicion that it's somewhere in here. And if you look closely, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it looks like there's a white plug poking out just underneath these two main cables. I'm going to try and pry this open and pull that cable out and see if that is the plug I'm looking for. All right, I think this looks like it's the plug, and I think I'm not a minute too soon, because look at this. The sheathing on this cable is coming loose as well. I can break it off in my hand, which is not great. So I'm going to unplug this guy and see if the two plugs are compatible. I think this is what I'm looking for. It looks a little different. Let me just go get that cable. Obviously this cable is not original Porsche, because Porsche does not sell this, so it's an aftermarket brand. Although, yeah, it's sort of kind of the same. It's not quite the same. The plugs look like they are compatible, so I think we'll be okay. Right, okay. Right, so I'm gonna leave this here, and I need to obviously push this piece. Oh look, it's coming from here. Oh, there we go. So I'm gonna push this through. Okay. All right, yeah, so it's tie wrapped onto this oil filler tube, so I need to clip off that tie wrap. I think that's going to be very difficult to get back in, but anyway, that's a problem for another moment. All right, so let's see if we can pull her free. All right, she's out and she's hanging underneath the car. I think the routing is fairly straightforward. Now I need to just undo this clip up here, which shouldn't be too difficult. All right, I've got that one already. I want to make sure I save this clip. All right, so that's the cable now loose. I can now pull it out from there as well. Okay, and it goes behind the dipstick. Oh, this whole thing is flaking into my face, which is horrible. All right, it's impossible to film and work, so what I need to do is just pull this cable from around the dipstick, so it goes behind the dipstick, and once that is done, I'm going to take out the starter motor again and disconnect it from there, and then we should be good. Need to get this 13mm nut off, and then I will have the new starter motor disconnected from the car, and as you can see now I'm just left with the starter harness on the starter motor. So I'll just quickly disconnect this last terminal as well. All right. There we go, one old starter and alternator cable disconnected from the car and going to the scrap heap. Alright, so I've got this harness now roughly in its spot. You can see it's going through where it needs to, and I also have the new plug peeking out through the top here. And if we look down below the car, it's hanging down there as well, with its new connector. So everything is roughly where it should be. So what I'm going to be doing now is connecting up the new alternator and then hanging the alternator in its place, and then we'll build the whole system back up from there. All right, it was a bit of a battle, but she's in position. I still need to tighten her up. You can see the cable sitting in its spot back there. And the other thing I wanted to show you is the routing of the cable. It's something I only figured out as I was putting in the new one. So let's jump underneath the car. All right, so I wanted to show you that the cable has to run over this bracket for the engine mount that you see here. So this guy here, this is a bracket for the engine mount. That's the cable, so it goes over. Because if you were to run it under, what you're seeing here is the steering shaft, and you'll run into some serious problems if you did it that way. I only figured this out as I put it into the car, not as I pulled it out. So make sure that's correct, and then you can see my routing is the same as it was behind the dipstick. One going up, one coming down. So let's get that alternator attached, and then we can move on. right, so you can see I've got the alternator on, I've got the belt on, and I have the system tensioned up. It's about 90-degree turn, which is roughly where it should be, so that should be good enough for now. So the last thing we have to do is install the starter again. Okay, so this was a little bit more of a battle than I expected. It wasn't difficult, but it was fiddly because obviously this new cable has no memory. So I had to go figure out what the path of the old cable was. And I had these things in the wrong order. And I probably did this 3 or 4 times, but now it's perfectly in its spot. And you can see the clamp up there is also in its spot. I deepened the original plug from the old wiring harness. I don't like this one not looking original, so I've got this little deepening tool. It's super easy to do. You just have to find the right size and you squeeze it into the plug. There we go, like that. And make sure that I put them in the right spots. I can then pull out this pin like that. And now find the corresponding hole, which is that one, and just push it back inside the old plug. Same goes for this one. Right size, this size. Just slide it over. You'll feel if it wiggles and then it pops out. And now I have a harness that looks like the original. Okay, so the last thing I have to do is just route this cable back under where it came from. And that's not going to be the easiest job, but I've got this this needle nose pliers here, which I hope will help me to just guide it through without damaging anything. There we go. She's through. And we can hook it up back together. That's done. We can tuck it in later. I just want to have it like this for now. With the plug installed above the brake booster, the last thing we have to do to make this car start again is install the MAF. So I'm just going to quickly squirt some contact cleaner in here, make sure it's all good. And then we can hook this guy up again. And you can see I've also cleaned this very nicely. So this should all be good now. And then we can pop this onto there again. There we go. And tighten her up. I'm not going to tighten her all the way because I don't know exactly what position it needs to be in for the airbox to fit onto, but that should be good enough for now. Alright, so let's hook up the negative terminal on the battery again and hopefully nothing starts melting. Let's see. I'm not hearing anything, which means I think we are okay. This all looks good. I'm not hearing a starter spinning, so I think I've done all of my work correctly. Right, so let's get into the car and see if it will start. Alrighty, let's see. Checking for neutral. What we want to see is we want to see this guy popping up. And my battery is dead. Excellent. Alright, so it turns out I'm a stupid idiot and I made a massive mistake, and that is I connected the wrong side of the harness to the wrong thing. So those red cables should have been on the starter and not the alternator. I don't know why I didn't cotton onto this earlier. I should have known better, but I didn't. So what's happening is that this little signal wire is now running towards the alternator and basically telling the alternator to alternate instead of telling the starter to start. Hopefully my mistake has not cost me an alternator. I don't think it would have, but you never know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get under the car. I'm going to try and swap out this harness side to side. And I'm going to do that with the alternator in its spot because I think it's doable. And I'll tell you how that went afterwards. Okay, so it's a couple of hours later and I can now confirm that the alternator wiring harness can be done with the alternator still in place. And actually the same goes for the starter motor. You can get them off with the starter motor in place. I think it's quicker to remove the starter motor, although this guy takes a long time to get out. So I would advise you to do it with the alternator in place. If you look right down there, you can actually see both the terminals. So you can get to them. And what I use to get to them is this little short tool that I bought. This is a Makita. But you can buy this probably anywhere. It's super small and it goes into tight spaces, and this is the kind of tool you need to be able to do that job. So I think it's time for us to try the starting again. All right, so let's give it a go again. Hopefully everything's okay. So I'll remind you again, we want to see this guy showing us about 13 volt. Let's go. Yeah, I'm not seeing any charge happening, but at least the car started. Alright, I think I need to go measure on the battery whether there's actually charge coming in or whether the meter is no longer working. If I measure the battery, I'm seeing 13 volts. I think this thing is charging actually. I think she's charging. 13.9, 13.4, it's getting better. Right. So I think I have a problem with my meter. Because it's still showing 0. All right, I've got the engine out now, so let's see where we get to now with a charge. And you can see we are at 12.8. So we are definitely charging from that alternator. All right, guys, so I'm a little bit stumped. I know this alternator is working. The previous one was really bad. That one did not charge properly. This one is charging at 13 volts. It's a little bit lower than I would have hoped, but maybe I need to change that voltage regulator. But at least it's charging. It's putting in more than the battery needs, which is great. So there is probably a problem in the dashboard or in the wiring, or maybe even a fuse that's not working. I'll have to go do some research. If you know the answer to my problem, please pop it down below. I'm happy to read and have a discussion. But that means we are now ready to do the next job, and that is doing the radiator flush. Once this radiator flush is done, we will start doing the belt service, but obviously all of this is happening in a next episode. So if you've watched this far, I would like to thank you for watching. And if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing, leave me a like, let's have a chat in the comments, give me some advice. I know I do really stupid things, especially with that wiring harness. I'm by no means professional, so I'm always happy to learn. But until next time, goodbye.